Okay, so we are at the very bottom of Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, literally the last line. We had just talked, among other things, about the machlokes between Rav and Rav Yanai, whether you can, when you're concluding a transaction, if you, let's say I loaned you wheat, can you pay me back in something other than wheat? Wheat, according to Rav, no. And according to Rav Yanai, we say the principle of Mali Demea Mali Moment. In other words, according to Rav Yanai, money can be translated into the product. I mean, you can buy it and return it. So if you return the money, it's also good. So according to him, according to Rav Yanai, he was more flexible, and he said that there's no ribis when you return money, because the money can be translated into the commodity. And we say that when you return the commodity, even though the price has risen, it doesn't look like ribis, because money is one thing you can say, okay, this is ribis, I'm getting more money. But in the commodity, it's hard to make that claim. So generally we say that if you return the commodity, that's why Rob says you return the commodity, no problem. But if you return money, that's a problem. Rav Yanai is more lenient, and he says that you can give either. So now the Gemara wants to take it a step further and asks the following. Omar Rava, the very bottom of Samach Gimel, Rava says, Hashda to Omar Rav Yanai. Now that we know that Rav Yanai says, Mali Hain, Mali Demehen, Omrinan, that we say this principle of Mali Hain, Mali Demin, when you are getting paid back from a loan, break the Gemara, so the kasha is Mali Demeyan, Nami Omrinan. Then we should also say, at the beginning of a transaction, is there a difference between the value of money or the value or the chayfet? So what's the kasha? That if the seller, all right, if the seller has money, or if we were talking about a case where the transaction was in a commodity, Tvua, and he got paid back in something other than Tvua. So the kasha now is, does the same Rav Yanai same principle hold at the outset of a transaction? And is there a difference between money and a commodity? In other words, will Rav Yanai say the same principle? Does it work going in just like it works coming out? That's the kasha.
Does it imply that there's a discussion on the going in that you can do anything? You can do the wheat, or you can do money, or whatever, as long as the lender is aware that the borrower may wish to pay in a different method, then there shouldn't be any question about it. They both agree ahead of time.
Right.
So this case is when they don't have a discussion and they don't agree on anything ahead of time. Is that the way to view this?
In Rav Yanai, yes. But remember, so Rav, of course, would say, no, this does not work, because when you enter into a contract, you have to have the chayfetz, you have to have the actual object, and you can't just translate it into money. According to Rav Yanai, there is at least a havamina that if he is flexible to exchange the chayfetz for money, that there should be no difference. I mean, the Gemara is just asking the question, conceptually, can you see a difference between the origins of a deal or the conclusion of a deal with regard to substituting money for a chayfetz? That's just a general question. In other words, are they the same, or do we see some differences? So that's what the Gemara is asking here. Are they the same? L'chayri, they should be, Jay, right? But
so this
the
is
Gemara
just
wants some kind of answer as to whether maybe there is a chilek.
So this example is being used as a test case for the underlying principle
Right.
question.
Right. And so we're going in with that Havamina. Yes, we're going in with the Havamina that Rabbi Yanai has the same principles going in as he would coming out. Now, why do we say coming out you can do it? Because remember, we said that there is a shar. When there's a shar, meaning that there's an established price, that is one of the exceptions to the laws of ribis. So that when there's a shar, even if the price increases, you lend it under the shar under that prevailing price. So again, question, does that same principle apply here? Says the Gemara, Uposkim al shar shebishuk. So the Chiddush is, well, Chiddush, I mean, Rabbi Yanai then says that you can enter into such a contract when there is a shar, even though afapisha ein lo, even though the seller doesn't have the goods. Because remember, if he's giving him money, he doesn't have the goods. We always say that you have to have the goods because that's really what the transaction is on. And therefore, if there's a shar, there's no problem with the goods. According to this, if you don't have the goods, you just have money, and there's a shar on the goods, which you don't have, then it's okay. That's the chiddush, because otherwise you would argue and say, wait a minute, you have to have the goods, and then there's a shar, and then you can get repaid in something other than the goods. Okay, that's what we've been operating under. But when you ask the question about whether or not you have to have going in, can you do either? And you're going to say yes. If there's a shar, then it comes out that even if the goods, you don't have the goods at the time of the transaction, it's also okay. And we've of course been arguing before whether or not you have to have whether or not yesh lo or not. But here we see ein lo. He doesn't have the goods, and yet going in, he can make the transaction. So that would be the chiddush here in Rav Yana. It's no problem coming out. The only problem is going in if ein lo. Remember the whole machlokes of yesh lo and ein lo. If he doesn't have it, then the transaction shouldn't be a good transaction. But from this, we would learn that it is a good transaction as long as there's a shar. And Rav Yanai says they're exchangeable. Then according to Rav Yanai, you can have ein lo and you can make a transaction as long as there is a shar.
You're making a contract on something that the seller doesn't have.
Doesn't have, correct. It's still a valid contract.
So that approach that you can write a contract on something that's not in the world.
Well, it's not in the world. It's not in the seller's possession. But why should it be acceptable, Jay? Because out there is a prevailing price. So we know the price, even though he may not have the commodity, but we know what the commodity is worth. And that's really what we need to have in order to exempt it from ribis. We have to have some kind of established price. Should there be a chilik if you have an established price, whether you have it or not? Okay, you're using money, but that money can be at some point be translated into the commodity, and the commodity has a price. And that price is what prevents there from being ribis.
It's hard to understand that a borrower would write a contract, sign away $1,000 that he owes, and he hasn't gotten anything yet.
Well, he's gotten the money. Gotten the money. He doesn't have the commodity, but he has the cash equivalent.
But he's trying to buy a commodity, not to borrow money from the lender.
Right. So it'll be up to him to take that money and buy the commodity. In other words, the seller, the
seller's going to give him money.
Yeah, he doesn't have the commodity. So is not having the commodity at the outside of a deal, does that negate the whole process?
Because the lender can give him money and say, go to the market and
buy it. There is
now I get it.
Yeah, there is a prevailing price, go buy it.
Yeah.
So that's Rabbi Yanai's chiddush, that you can do that with money as long as there's a prevailing price attached to it, then you could do it. So So that's Rav Yana Shita. And Rav Yana Shita is Mali Heyman to the Mayhem in the beginning of a transaction, at the end of the transaction, it's always okay. Okay. So this is what Rava wants to introduce and understand from Rav Yanai's position. Okay, so it does make sense. Correct the Gemara. Eisbe Rav Papa, Rav Huna, Rav Yeshua, Rav. So these are Moran, Rav Papa, and Rav Huna, Rav Yeshua. Ask this following question of Rava, who makes this, and they're saying we don't get it. Kulam yeshlo mutter. Remember in the brisa that we said by Rav Oshia, where you started off with Tvua, then you went to Yayin, then you went to Shemen. In other words, you kept kicking the ball down the road in different commodities. Okay, and why was that okay according to Rav Oshia? Because in each case you had the commodity at the time the transaction was supposed to have concluded. But since the fellow said, okay, give me my Tvua, I want to buy Yayin, and the merchant says, I have Yayin, I'll give you Yayin at the new price. Remember, he was making out because the price kept going up. So he wanted to switch from Tvua to Yayin and then from Yayin to Shemen. So in all those cases, we said it's okay. Kulam in yeshlo mutter. If he has the commodity, it's mutter. In Einlo, also. But in Rav Yoshi's example, in that brisa, if he would not have that commodity, then it would not be permitted. He would not be able to transfer it from one commodity to the other. So according to Rava, how does he understand that brisa? In other words, Rava's interpretation of Rav Yana, how does he understand the brisa? In other words, because there is a shar, it should be okay, right? So that's a kasha on Rava, because according to Rava, you can do that even ein lo. And here from the Brisa we see it's only in yesh lo. So that's the kasha that they have on Rava's interpretation of Rav Yanai. How would Rav Yanai allow that in a case of ein lo? Because according to the Brisa, that's the chiluk here. That would make it not permissible because of ein lo. So that's the kasha they have on Rava. How does Rava interpret Rav Yanai? Remember, he's an Amora, and he's trying to say, and the Rav Oshia is a brisa, so it's the Tana from the Mishnah. So that's the question that he asks on Rava. How does Rava conclude that? So remember, we started out by saying, there shouldn't be much of a difference between going in, coming out, but we see that if you interpret the brisa that you could only have it in the yeshlo, then it doesn't work. So Rava says not so fast. So Rava says I can answer that. Omale. So Rava said back. He gives an interesting answer. Hosam halva. Rav Oshia's case is a case of a halva. When he loaned him the money from the Tvua, he gave him the money, gave him the Tvua, and then he went from one to the other. That's a halva. So in the case of a halva, yeshlo, you have to have it. Hacha, in Rava's case, with Rav Yanai, zivine. We're talking about a sale. So in the case of the sale, if he gets money, then so what? It's a sale. So remember, we're making that difference between halva and mechira, the difference between a loan and a sale, because mida oraisa, only a loan can incur ribis, right? It's only the Rabbanan who make other chumras. But according to the Torah, which is we're focusing on that point, it's only halva. So, okay, so there's a problem here, but so maybe you shouldn't do it, but if you do it, there's no ribis. So that's the way he wants to answer the kasha. So it's not a kasha on Rava because his circumstance is one of a sale, not of a halva. All right, so that's a valid answer, and therefore Rava is not compromising his interpretation of Rabbi Yana. Okay, so that we get that. So that should be clear. Okay, so now Let's take a look. Moving here, because there's a long Rashi, which I'm just not going to do right now. Okay, so that's the conclusion that according to Rav Yanai's position can work both ways. Can work at the beginning of a deal, the beginning of a in that case a sale, and at the end of the sale. But we're only talking about a sale in that case and not a loan. All right. So all those circumstances, where there is a shar, and all those things have to be in play. In other words, in order for a transaction to not be considered ribis, then you have to have yesh lo, and in the case of a halva, you have to have you have to have a shar, and in the case of a halva, you have to have yesh lo, but in the case of a sale, you don't have to have yesh lo. Okay, so that's how we're going to conclude the Gemara here. Right. Now the Gemara asks a more basic question. We've made this assumption, and we've been learning that a shar is, we said from the very beginning, that's one of the two exceptions. Shar, yeshlo, those are one of the two exceptions for ribs. Now the Gemara wants to get into the actual underneath it and understanding why. Why does a shar work? Why, if you say that if there's a market price, then all of a sudden we're not worried about ribs? How does that work? So, Rabbi Yosef Damin Travaya, Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef both hold of this position. My Tama Amar Rabbanan Poskim al Shar Shebeshuk. Why do we can enter into a contract if there's a market, if there's a price, an established price in the marketplace, even though if he doesn't have it, and as you don't need both, but even if he doesn't have it, if there's a market price, it's good. Why? The Amalei, because we say that, let's say you enter into a deal and the price goes up. So if the price goes up, then l'chayra it's ribis, okay? I mean ribis rabbanan, but let's say l'chayra it's ribis because you're getting more than you bargained for. Shekila, ivucha b'shadjeh, is that right? So this is an expression that the thank you very much for what you've done, but it's like you threw it into the thorns. It's an expression that what favor did you do for me? Okay, you did me no favors. Why? Maya Hanali, how have you benefited me? How have I because you're giving me more, you're giving me value more than I gave you. Let's say I hadn't given it to you and I kept the money, right? I kept it to myself. So he said that I could have gone elsewhere. I could have gone, so there was two towns that near Pumbedisa called Hane and Shule, which apparently were not big towns, so the prices maybe weren't as elevated as they would be in the big city. I could have gone to these two towns, and I could have bought the same amount of tfuah more cheaply, right? And then when the price went up, I get a profit. So why, in other words, should there be the possibility of ribis in this particular case when I had an alternative that would have given me the same return without being ribis? In other words, if I buy something cheaply and I keep it in my possession and it goes up, it's mine, no problem. So now that we entered into a loan or into a deal, yes, we entered into a deal. And and it increased in price. So here I'm compromised. I should have gone the other way, and because I could get it the other way, it should negate having ribis here. That's the kasha.
That's a great question.
It's a great question. So anytime that you are subject, according to this, in ribis, you have to ask yourself, did I need to do this to get the increase in price? If the answer is yes, you had no alternative, okay, then you have to face the music. But here you say, I would have gone to these two towns and they're not far away, and I would have made a transaction, I would have held it, and a few months later, whenever the amount of time is, I made the money. Remember, it's kind of like the theory that we had posited earlier, saying that that we said it by Yeshlo though. We said by Yeshlo, if he has it, then it's as if he has it already in his possession. Therefore, later he made the profit, not ribis. That was the theory. So extend that theory here too. He could have used the money otherwise and made the same profit that is now because of the rise in the commodity, and there would certainly not have been ribis. So the chayra.
Hi, Tamar.
Was that so? That's the kasha. The kasha.
Yes.
Why should they be
Last
ribis?
time we have a Shiur now, but anyway,
Yeah.
thank you.
Why should they be ribis? It would be the same thing if he had it. So that's the Gemara's kasha. Okay, we're going to try to reach a conclusion.
Rabbi,
Understand what the how we're going to get to understanding the principle of having a market. Okay, so that's the Gemara's kasha.
but Rabbi, he could have gone to the other town, but the problem is that he didn't. I mean, the market and location matter. The market in that specific location. So you have a different price in a different market for different reasons. So
right, but he's saying I didn't have to go through this transaction and then have an increased value of my tvua and be subject to ribis, because I could have gone, and we're not talking about halfway around the world. We're talking about a village that was outside of Pompadisa where it was known that the prices were lower. And he says I could have gone there and got paid for the commodity it would have been cheaper. And then I would have had the same result when the price went up. So why are you penalizing me because I didn't do that? I mean, look, the argument, Michael, is that I'm not terribly inconvenienced if I go to these other towns instead of doing it in my locale. Maybe if it were much more of a tircha, you can argue, well, that isn't the same thing. But here it's literally a few minutes away. I mean, whatever it was, obviously these Hane and Chile we're not so far away that it's considered an inconvenience that he shouldn't do it. But the principle of the question is, if you have an alternative, just generally, like we always say, if you have an alternative, why you penalized? I could have gone to the alternative. In general, that's a principle that we embrace. So, all of a sudden we say that even though you're going to penalize him, then the question is, what does he gain? What does he gain? So just because he doesn't have it, okay, he could have gone to the alternative method and not be penalized. So in other words, that's the reason why, if there isn't a established price in the market, then that's the argument you could make. So therefore, we say that if there's a price in the market, then you don't have to do that. You don't have to run to another source and do the same thing and it come out okay. Because once the market price is established, then Michael, you don't have to run to Hanin Chile. You work in Pumpadisa, and that's and then you don't have ribis at the end because of that. So that's how the Gemara wants to understand the underlying principle of why, if you have that market price, it's valid, and you don't have to, the Yotzar Shar is valid, and therefore you don't have to do anything else. It's an interesting rationale, sort of backing into it by saying that he had alternatives. If he had alternatives, so sticking with it here, even though if he doesn't have it, Elo, it's still okay. So that's kind of the rationale, right? Okay. So now, if we say that, okay, that seems to be okay. So So the Mechaber here was these two Amoraim. I mean, Rabba and Rabbi Yosef both were the principals of this principal architects of this theory. Omalei Abaye Rabbi Yosef. So Abaye comes back to Rabbi Yosef and says, according to what you just said, Elami Ata, according to you what said, that there is no ribbis, because the fellow is making money because of the rise in price, which he would have made anyway through another source. So how could you hold him to ribbis? He could have easily have made this money without ribbis. That's the chiddush. That's the theory. So he says, how can you say that? If you say that, muta luvo saw b'saw, then all of a sudden saw b'saw. What is saw b'saw? We said in the past that if I lend you a saw is a measurement. I lend you a saw of a commodity. You may not pay me back, and I lend it to you. So we're talking about a ribbis situation. And you pay me back in the saw, then you're not allowed to do that. That could be the potential. But let's say the saw was worth $100, and you're giving me back a saw for $110, even though it's still a saw. So we say that's ribbis, because everybody will know that the saw has increased in price. So even though it's a commodity, not money, the halacha is you can't do it. That was the previous Gemara. All right, so saw is not permitted. What should you do? You have to pay him back. If it went up 10%, then you have to pay him a saw minus 10%, whatever that comes out. In other words, you have to give him less than a saw. You give him 90% of the saw, and in order for not to have ribbis. That was the halal. According to what you say, says Abaye, that what? Oh, it's not ribbis because I can go somewhere else and make my money. So if I decide to make my money here, or I get a profit here. You know what it's like? It's almost like a migui. Because I could have done something else, then what I do shouldn't be considered improper. Okay, in a sense, I'm not saying it's a migui, but it's that kind of a theory. I have an alternative way of making the money. Why should you penalize me? So Abaye says, if that theory holds, that a saw b'saw should be permitted. Why? Because the fellow who is getting back the saw, who's making the profit, could say Shekila Temusa V'Shadya Achir, the same language. What am I benefiting here? It's like throwing it to the thorns, right? Why? Because Chita de Korcha Bav Lavoy. Because what happens? Let's say I gave you the saw, and let's say the saw was destroyed and ruined. There was a flood, and the saw was ruined. Okay, or I left it in my possession and it was ruined. So can you say, you know what? I shouldn't be chayiv here because if I hadn't lent it to you, then the price would have gone up in my possession. Okay, in other words, just because I lent it to you and got destroyed, okay, that's not my problem. So the increase in value that came about shouldn't be considered ribbis.
It's disappeared.
Say what?
It disappeared.
It disappeared. Right.
The money itself.
Right. But we don't say that. We say that a saw b'saw is awesome. He's saying as an alternative method, why is saw b'saw awesome? You could have the same argument as we have here, that he could have not lent it to him, or he could have not lent it, and he would have made the same money because of the increase in price would have been in his possession rather through the deal. I mean,
in a warehouse, yeah.
Right. So why should I be penalized when I could have done an alternative? The point of Rava's chiddush is that where there's an alternative to making the same money, you shouldn't be penalized if you're making the money in what appears to be ribbis. That was the chiddush. So then take it to the extreme. Everybody says saw b'saw is not permitted. Why isn't it permitted? There's an alternative path to how you could make the money by not being involved in the transaction. So then the transaction should be okay because you had an excuse. It's like the Migo theory in that I could have done this differently and I would not have been penalized. Why am I penalized when I do it in this particular fashion? So if the theory holds, it should hold completely. That's the kasha
Rabbi,
that
I'm
that's the
confused.
kasha that Abaya has in Rabbi Yosef's theory. Okay, so it's a good kasha. It's a good kasha.
Rabbi, I'm confused because I thought if you lent a commodity, regardless of what happened to the price, and you return that commodity, even if the value increased, there was nothing improper about that. Because, so why is this?
No, yeah, but we're trying to understand why it's not improper. This Gemara now is going to the underlying principle of why, if there's a shar, is it okay? So that we're digging into understanding the theory of yesh shar, of that there is a market price.
But I thought Rava's reaction here was that if there was if the value increased
Where there was a market price, yes.
from the market price and you return the commodity, that's ribis.
No, there's no ribis
No,
if there's a
no.
market price. And why is there no ribis? Because I could have held it for me and not have to even engage in the question of ribis.
He would
So
have made
it's
the
because I
input.
have an alternative that there shouldn't be ribis. That's
Right.
the Kiddush, where I have an alternative to say, oh, I would have made this money by going to another town and buying it more cheaply and then letting it rise in my possession, which I could do. There's no ribis. So why should I be penalized when I actually come into commerce and make a deal and then it increases in price and there's a shar. So
So
that's
is
the
this
underlying theory of why shar is good. Go ahead.
so this is so the question I misinterpreted, I had it reversed. The justification for returning the article, the commodity as it was, is logical. It seems like they're trying to substantiate that it's not logical, but it's logical because you lent me a commodity and I returned the commodity.
Right.
Even if the value of the commodity changed, that's not
Right.
ribis.
It's not ribis because of the shar, because there is an established price, and that price is what everybody agreed to. So if we agreed to
But
the
it
price
was an established price at the time, and
at the
now the
time,
price is maybe different, plus or
right,
minus.
and we're
And
not going to penalize you if there's a difference in
we're
price,
not going to penalize either party
either
for
party, correct.
But if the price goes down, then somebody loses
So,
in a deal.
right, right, and of course there's no remedy for that.
But
Oh,
the
he would have to
idea,
pay back more to match the market price.
not if you return the commodity.
If you
It's
return
I
the
mean,
commodity, right, but presumably he was taking a loss if he was getting the commodity at the lower price, and he has to repay it, at a higher value.
but I thought, I mean, just confirm I thought there was a principle that if you lend the commodity and the commodity is returned, regardless of what's happened to the market price was established at a certain time, the commodity is returned. Forget about the money now. You're not returning money, you're returning the commodity. If you return the
Correct.
commodity, regardless of what happened later in terms of
Doesn't
market
matter.
value, it's okay to
It's
return
okay.
the commodity. That's
Yes,
what I thought was the basic principle.
that is correct. That
Okay.
is correct.
So now if you pay back in money, then you have a question, because if the value has increased or decreased, what am I giving back to you? And that's where we get into ribis. I thought there were no
And Rav Yana,
situations.
but remember, Rav Yana said that doesn't constitute ribis because the money and the commodity are fungible. They're both exchangeable.
But I'm not sure I understand Rabbi Yanai's position. The money at the time that the price was established of the loan, and you return the money that the value was then, or as he's saying, regardless of what it is now, and I return the value now, which could be different, it's not
Correct. And Rav Yana says that's okay. Rav Yana says that's okay because there was a shar. So the question is, why does this shar have so much power that
Right.
it allows a rise in price and there not be ribbis.
To
But the
override, yeah, it overrides the notion of ribbis.
Exactly. And
but
so, and why? The answer is because he could argue I could have made the same money in another transaction that
Another
would
way.
clearly not be ribbis.
okay.
So when I make it in this transaction, which may look like ribbis, it shouldn't be ribbis.
But if I made that contract, as we talked about in prior weeks, if I made a contract that I'm going to pay you back the exact same amount, regardless of what the value has changed. So I'm borrowing this much money and I have the option to return the commodity or to pay you the market value at that time because
And
that
it's risen in price, right?
and it's risen in price. It's still not ribbis because there was a contract there. And is the notion there that that's a sale, even though it's a loan?
So remember that the Rava gave an answer earlier that there's a difference between a sale and a loan. And in a loan, so we're talking about a sale, not a loan,
No,
because
we're talking about a loan. In the loan, I have the option. I can return the commodity to you. So there is an agreement. I can return the commodity to you, or I can return the price, the equivalent price at that time.
right.
So is there a distinction if now the price has risen? I can return the commodity with no ribbis, but I know Rabbi thinks it's not, but is Rava thinks it's ribbis because it was an agreed upon price at the market value then, and
But,
I'm
but
returning the money then?
the contract can't give two options. You
Why
can
can't
pay
it?
me with
Why
the
can't it?
material or you can pay me with
No,
money.
no,
If that's in the
it's a
contract,
loan. It's a loan, and you can pay me back in these two ways. Why? It's a loan. It's not a sale.
that's
It's
in
a
the
loan.
star. The star has to say there's two ways you can pay me
Yes,
back.
but I'm asking in the star, aren't both considered loans? Because the value was established at the time the agreement was made. So I'm going to pay you the value now, regardless of what happens before, or I can give you the commodity back, which means I, the borrower, I have the option of doing one or the other. It's still a loan. It's not a sale. So what
Okay.
I don't understand is why either of those circumstances would be considered ribbis if the agreement at the time the transaction was consummated, the loan transaction, it was established, you will pay me this or this way at the time, your choice. And why is that a sale and not a loan?
Well, how does ribbons come in?
No,
If you
no.
Well,
have two options,
the rabbis are introducing this. It's not Doraisa, it's not ribbis. The rabbis are trying to make a problem where there isn't one.
So again, I'm not 100% what the question is because what we're trying to establish is why why what you just said is not ribbis. The example you gave, why is it not ribbis when the price goes up? So
Because that was the deal at the time. So it's locked in at that time. We
right,
don't know what the future is going to be.
right.
So, I mean, this is the problem I have because when
So,
we're
let me
defining
listen, why is locked in an answer to why there should not be ribbis? So the question is, why is locked in?
because it was an established market then, and that's when the loan took place. So,
But how do you know in this discussion, how do you know that a market price obviates ribbis? What gives you the reason to think that if there's a market price, if it goes up later
well,
and you have a loan, it's not ribbis? Why would you say that?
because all the poskim are establishing that if it's if you lend me money and you pay me back the same amount regardless of whether that currency went up or down, you've paid me the same amount. Why is it any different So that's that price at that time
But you
is
made
equated.
ribbons, but
What?
you made more money than
No, no,
you lent.
because this is the problem. This is you can't have it both ways. You can't have it that we agree on a time in a transaction and we know that there's going to be change in price of commodity. There could be a drought in the commodity. There could be, great rains and and overflow of commodity. Same thing in terms of currency. So a loan is established at a value at a certain time. So if you loan me 100 zuz and I pay you back 100 zuz, but the zuz now has increased in value, why is that ribis? Why have I made money on that? Because that's what we're making the transaction at the time and we don't know what's going to happen.
But the beginning of the sale, the beginning of the transaction, the fact that he opened up two paths for repayment, the two paths don't have the same set of rules.
That's not well. The thing is, but that's the point of the contract. It does that. It's solidifying at that moment. We agree the market. We are going to agree to what the market is now. At that moment, the price equivalent is the market.
Listen, Michael. When you have the contract that had two options for repayment, the whole discussion here is that one option is really a loan and the other option is really a sale. They're happening simultaneously.
No, it gives you two ways to pay back. And
but each way has a different set of rules.
No, it doesn't. Not at that moment. If that loan was paid back at that very moment, there would not be a difference because the value
was path one
at that point in time.
Path one.
And that's on both of them. Because if you lend me, a core of flour, and I pay you back a core of flour the next minute, it's going to be worth that price. I mean, but the market fluctuates daily. But the idea of loan is to return something that I lent you. I want to encourage you to lend your brother when he doesn't have the ability to pay for that himself.
Yeah.
So at that moment, I'm lending it to you. At that time, it has a value. If you're going to take a look at the future, then you've changed it. Then you're looking at a futuristic market. But the rabbis are trying to dip both. I mean, as we talked about yesterday, how when it's contingent that I'm going to exchange land for you. If I can either pay you back or exchange land for you. Last week we talked about, and do I have the right to payros or not payros? And then they're saying it's a retroactive sale, but it's not. It's a loan that at that time, until they make the decision, the sale is not made. So you can't make this. They're changing the circumstances every time. You got to be consistent.
Well, your question, Michael, is really when he gave two options at the beginning when they signed the contract. One seems to be the Gemara is changing one to keeping one as a loan in the rules of loans, and the other option is it's turning into a sale, which under the rules of sale, that's when you could have ribis.
But the thing is, it's not a sale. So let's say that the agreement is between two commercial enterprises that deal in these. And so you can pay me the money, the equivalent of it at this point in time, the commodity. It's not going on the commodities market, quote unquote, so that value changes. So I need this now for a customer. So lend me that and I'll use that and I'll pay you at the value as of today. We're demarcating it as of today. You can either pay me back in the commodity or in money as of today. That's the deal. We're striking the price today. But
you
lending
added something.
it to you. Pay me back in whatever way you want. That's not.
But you added something. You're saying that halfway through the loan period, the option to pay back in money can cost him more, or
No, I'm
somebody
not adding
makes money or
something
loses
that
money.
I'm not adding something that was those were the terms at the time. And as
The
so it's a
time
matter
keeps
of when
moving, Michael. The time keeps moving every day that the
no,
loan
well, of
hasn't
course
been.
it does. And that's what you have to establish. So, you know, the transaction is fixed as of a certain point in time, and both parties take risk. And what the rabbis are saying, with time, there's risk. And so, therefore, if you're the lender and you make out because of the risk, you're violating the Torah. But if you're the borrower, you're not violating the Torah because you can do whatever you want to gain from that. That's what this is. So it's either an evolving pathway or it's a fixed transaction as of that point in time. You're making a transaction, but it is not a sale. You have a loan transaction. In those days, people could pay back in many different ways, as we've discussed. They could pay with another commodity, they could pay with the commodity itself, or they could pay with a monetary equivalent that was the market price as of that day.
At the
Those are
date
all
of the
loans.
loan, right? The date of the
Those right at the
transaction.
date of the transaction. That's what
So your
the
question
Shiur
is,
says. The loan
those are-
agreement says.
so
That's
your
the thing.
question is during the moment of transaction, do those parameters of what can be paid back in two different ways, do they track the whole year that the loan is in effect?
No, it is established at that, and both parties take the risk that the return is something. The same thing is true with any kind of a loan.
Yeah, but why wouldn't the borrower then say, "I'm paying you back in with the material"? If I
Well,
have to pay
but
you
see, the
back with
lender
money,
agreed to that. So the borrower has the advantage of saying, "Look," because there's nothing, according to the Rabbeim, there's nothing wrong with the borrower profiting out of this, but there's a problem with the lender profiting. That's what's an oxymoron. It's inconsistent. The person
I
who is
agree with you.
lending to help the fellow, he can't benefit, but the person who's
Well,
who's
I
who's
agree
borrowing,
with you,
he can
Michael.
benefit any way, shape, or form. There's nothing wrong.
Yeah, but I agree with you that the conditions at the time of the transaction should be steady all the way through the loan period.
But we know that the marketplace is not that, but
Right.
the agreement locks it in. So whatever happens was as of that time, it should not be ribis because it's the deal, and it is a lending deal. It is not a sale.
So
The
you're
rabbis
saying
can't
that it's
convert a
never a
loan to a
sale.
sale.
You're stating that the transaction at the transaction time, it is only a loan and can never be considered a sale, even
Correct.
if you want to pay back with option number two, which
Correct.
is money.
And the parties agreed to that. So why are the rabbis inserting themselves that this is ribis
Yeah,
because the market
they
changed?
convert it to a sale. That's the
And
whole
it's
thing.
not a sale. It's just
That's your question.
yeah.
Why did the Rabbanan consider path number two, payment path number two, as a sale?
Because and I said this before, and I don't mean to be redundant, but if I'm supposed to lend to my person, why would I want to go through all this sorrows? Why would I want to lend somebody? I'd rather give them something because then I wouldn't have to go through the sorrows.
I agree with you.
So
Right.
it makes me not want to lend to my fellow who is in need.
Right. So
I'm sorry for keep belaboring this point. I'm just stuck on it.
right.
That's a fundamental question about this transaction. You're not belaboring it.
Right. So I think what you now having a discussion is really not on exact point to what we're talking about, because when we talked in the past about two alternative ways of paying, therefore it's not ribis, that was a different machlokes where Rabbi Yehuda said that as long as there isn't an established ribis only option, as long as there was not an established process that you're going to give me back, let's say, money, which would be ribis. If there was an alternative, that alternative waters down the ribis option, and therefore, even though on its face it's ribis, we say it's not ribis because there was an alternative way
Giving back for.
of giving back without ribis.
But Rabbi, in reality, from the way the rabbis look at it, both are ribis, because money can change value and commodities can change value.
Right,
So
except that commodities don't count as ribis, but money
that's
counts
the
as ribis.
rabbi's definition. They're saying
Right.
if you pay me in a commodity, and that's what I thought that Rava was challenging. But so they're saying we establish, regardless of what happens in the marketplace as far as a commodity, I lend you a commodity, you pay back with a commodity, there's no problem with it. Even if the value of that commodity has increased or decreased, you've paid me back what you borrowed, and it's exactly the same item. Now, the question I have, would that be true if it was money? Because the value of the currency changes as well. So if I lend you and I only allow you to pay back in money at the same value, does that also, because from the rabbi's perspective, money is danger. Because the value of money can change.
Wait a minute. I thought the idea about money was that the value wouldn't change, that once this price was established, you could do the trade. Now, the problem is that sometimes the monetary value of commodities change.
So let's say
a sheep
so the commodity value went down, which means the borrower is paying back at the lending at the amount that it was lent. If it was a commodity option, either or, and the commodity value went down, let's say, then the borrower would be paying extra value from what it is today. That's ribis. But if the borrower gained and the value went up and he got to pay the same amount, then there wouldn't be ribis. It is inconsistent thinking. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No.
Can you just redefine what exactly ribis is? I never did get a complete picture of what it was. If somebody borrows money, you pay back the same amount of money, or if they borrow a commodity, you pay back the same amount of the commodity, and that's not ribis. Ribis is like an interest.
It's effectively any payback beyond the amount of the loan. So it could be more grain if you borrow grain, if more money if you borrowed money, and it can also be anything added on, like a tip, so to speak.
Right. But so comes the Gemara and says the way we're going to get around that is if there is an established market price at the outset of the transaction, then that price is set, and therefore everybody knows what the deal is. Therefore, later, if you return the tabua, let's say the commodity, and it has an increase in price, it will not be considered ribis because the parties had already agreed that there was a prevailing price, and that's the price that everybody is going to go by. So it doesn't matter, so to speak, if the price went up. That's the whole principle of Yotzer Shai.
But if the value of the commodity went down, however,
if it went down, then there's nothing to talk about because there is no provision for any penalty for losing money. It's only for gaining money.
Wait, the borrower lost money. If I have to pay back the same amount as the value at the time, and right. Now the value of that
because he agreed to that. What? Even though it went down, but that's the number he agreed to, so there should be no.
Well, that's my point about all this. There's an agreement, so why does anything that happened as in elapsed time make any difference?
Oh, right, and your question is inherently a correct point, but we're trying to say that if it's a commodity and commodities exchange hands, it's not as obvious as there would be ribbis as if it were money. If money is involved in the transaction, people would be more inclined to say he's getting more money than he lent at the outset, and therefore it should be ribbis. It kind of gets lost in the shuffle if it is in a commodity, because most people can't evaluate the value of a commodity even if it's in front of them. What, this tavua is now worth 110 and you lent me 100. People don't necessarily have the appreciation of understanding that. People understand, I lent you 100, you gave me 110. That, because that's the, in other words, that's the mode of transaction for most people, all people. So money becomes a problem, but commodities don't have a problem. Rav Yana is the one who introduced the chiddush that even money doesn't have a problem as long as you establish the price. And even though money is exchanged, which on the face of it would seem to be ribbis, it's not ribbis because of the shar, because of the prevailing price. The Gemara here is asking the question, why? Why is prevailing price so powerful that it allows for an exchange which on its face is ribbis, but yet we're going to say it's not ribbis? That was the Gemara's, that's what Rabbi Yosef come to say. And the answer to that is that because he could have an alternative for having increased his wealth, his value, by buying it somewhere else more cheaply and keeping it, that's what allows him to say the fact that I entered into this deal and I'm making more than I would have is because why did I even bother? I had a way of making the same money without bothering. So that's the underlying principle of why shar is okay. Then the Gemara asked, if that's the point, that it's because of the alternatives, then you should be permitted to lend saw b'saw, which is the classic case of ribbis, because the saw that you're returning is worth more, and that's the classic case of ribbis. Then the same principle should apply. Why is it ribbis? I could have taken that money and done something else with it, and I could have made the money. In other words, you're now introducing a topic which seems to steamroll the whole question of ribbis. If I had alternative, if I didn't have an alternative, okay, then there's no choice. But if there's always an alternative, if you're arguing that there's always an alternative, and that alternative allows you to make money without it being a loan for ribbis, then you should therefore allow the loan, because why not? He's making the money on the loan, but he could have made it otherwise. So that principle of shar should apply here as well. That was the Gemara's kasha. So then the Gemara gave an answer that there is a chiluk between a loan and a sale. Everything we've been talking about is a sale, and in a sale you can make the argument of shar, but in a loan you can't make that, because in a loan, since it's midoraisa, so therefore, shar is a rabbinic concept. It's not a Torah concept. It's not a biblical concept. So if you're going to go according to the Torah, in the Torah portion, then shar has no effect. Therefore, you can't fall back on the argument, oh, I could have made the money elsewhere, and therefore this should be okay. No, doesn't work. Only works in a case where there's a shar, which means a case midrabanan. But in a case, minat Torah, where there's classic ribbis, there is no wiggle room. If you lend 100 and get back 110, or saw b'saw, which is the same, you are chayiv in ribbis, because there's no gimmick. You can't say, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. No gimmick at all, right? So that was the original kasha. And the Gemara, so Rabbi Yosef came with an answer, and he said, you know what? You're right. then in the case of a halva, I have to agree with you 100% that it is ribis. But what I'm talking about is a sale. So now we have a clear demarcation between loans and sales. That in a sale, you can make such an argument that there is alternative ways of making money, and therefore there should be no midrabanan. We're talking here midrabanan. There's other ways of making money, and therefore there should be no ribis midrabanan. But in the case of a halva, the case of a loan, then you're staring at a Torah Isser, and there's no wiggle room. So that's ultimately the terrace that Rabbi Yosef gives on to defend this principle of Rabbah. So then, so now, okay, so that's where we are. So that's what so Rav Ada Ba'ava said to Rava, you just gave this chiluk between halva and between sale. In a sale, okay, if you're going to go and you're going to buy it more cheaply, and therefore you're going to make the profit. Therefore, there shouldn't be ribis on the sale. There shouldn't be ribis on sale because that's an alternative. But how are you going to get that alternative price? So the Gemara ventures that he would make it by going to a broker. He would go to a broker and would tell him, this is what I want to buy. And the broker knows that you can buy this more cheaply because that's their business. He knows you can buy it most cheaply. So then what? So then he has to pay the broker. By paying the broker, he might as well already do the transaction because the money he saves by buying it more cheaply, he's already having to supplement with paying a broker. So now we're back to square one. So there's no benefit to going elsewhere and buying it. You can't make that argument. LMI, it has to be in the transaction itself. So therefore there should be ribis. There should be ribis, midrabanan, there should be ribis on the sale because you can't argue I have an alternative method of buying it, which would absolutely not be ribis. So that's the kind. So once Rava gave an answer and said, you know what, there's a big difference between halva and a sale, then I'm going to ask you, why in a sale are you allowed? Only because you have an alternative. But let's say you don't have an alternative, because why should I waste my time going and buying it more cheaply if I'm going to have to pay a broker, and therefore I'll be back to square one where I would have been if I made the transaction with you. So that's the kasha that even in that particular case. And by the way, why that alternative was the reason for Yesh L'Shar. So he's asking, what's the point of the Shar? The Shar isn't doing anything. If I have to pay a broker and I can't get it more cheaply, you can no longer argue that the Shar makes a difference, because the Gemara says, why does the Shar make a difference, and gave us this alternative? But it's no longer an alternative if you have to pay a broker. So Amalei, so Rava says to him, the Kol Yoavle Nami, because the reason why it's not, you could do it, is because in the classic case of the seller, he's arguing there's also a broker. So in the case of the seller, there's also a broker, so then the cost would be higher than if he bought it more cheaply and paid a broker. In other words, the brokerage cancels out. You pay a broker in every case. If you pay a broker in every case, then you're still left with the alternative that if you buy it more cheaply, right, that you can, that's an argument. Therefore, the Shar still works. What's that?
You're saying that you can't buy it cheaply without going through a broker?
That's the assumption. So that's the assumption. So that was the kasha. The answer is no. Brokerage occurs not only in that case. Brokerage occurs in any case, even in a classic case of a loan. There's a broker attached somehow, and that broker has to make his money. So if the broker has to make his money, we didn't talk about that until now that there was a broker. But all of a sudden we're saying, in the classic case of two people transacting, there's a broker, right?
That's not part of the star.
So that's what Rava says. And Rav Ashi says, no, there doesn't have to be a broker. Why? Zuze de inche inu obdele shisaf sirisa. Because by doing the transaction itself, that's considered the brokerage. In other words, you and I transacting without a third party, he's saying by definition, the fact that I have the money, that makes the deal, and it's as if that was the brokerage. So what is he trying to say? He's trying to say that that in any case, no matter how you slice it, in the case of a sale, there isn't ribbis. Why? Because of the shar. And the whole principle of the shar is that you're allowed to make the money because you would have made the money. So as long as you would have made the money, making it in this particular case, okay, it's a different way of making it, but I didn't have to rely on it. Therefore, if the price goes up, why should I be penalized? That's the whole principle of shar, according to this Gemara, is that it obviates or sort of cancels out the increase in value of the transaction because I could have made that money elsewhere. And if I can make it elsewhere, then the fact that I entered into a transaction and I increased the value of my value, midrabanan, there's no ribbis because that's not considered ribbis. It's not considered ribbis. So I could have made the money. Of course, midoraisa, that doesn't work. So in any case of doraisa, where there's an increase in value, you cannot argue yotza hashar. You can't say that the shar would have made me the money anyway, because midrabanan, because midoraisa, there isn't any wiggle room.
But
a transaction that involves an increase in value, plain pashut is ribbis.
Yeah, but if the increase of value is because of inflation rather than profit or demand in the marketplace, I don't understand how that would work. If the inflation, money inflation, without material inflation, without the tool going up in price, how does that?
So Jay, the chiddush here is that when you lend something to someone else and there is inflation, then you need to get back what you lent him without the inflation. In other words, and of course that's the humrah of the deraisa, which is why when you enter into a deal with a saw and you get back a saw, there is inflation. It went up 10%, and therefore it's not permissible. The only thing that I can get back is the portion of the saw. In other words, when it went up in price, you can only get back the portion of the saw equivalent to what I lent you. So if it went up 10%, then you have to give me the equivalent of 90% of the saw, however that comes out, because that would be shava b'shava. That would then be an equal deal. And so you're right. B'deraisa, we don't know from inflation. Inflation wasn't a factor.
This is contradictory, Rabbi, because if I lend you a commodity and the cost of production of that commodity increases, I still have to pay you back the commodity. Are you saying that if I lent you 100 bushels of wheat, and the price for production, as Jay said, inflation, the cost of seed or the cost of
machinery, whatever
machinery goes up, I still have to pay you back that full amount. Are you telling me that the borrower doesn't have to pay the full amount if the price goes up? But if the price goes down, he still pays the full amount back. It just doesn't make sense. I thought you're lending this commodity, and if you pay back in the commodity again, that you don't worry about the value increasing or decreasing or the cost of production going up. I lent you 100 bushels of wheat. You're going to give me back 100 bushels of wheat. That is not ribis because it's that you can introduce all those other things. Am I wrong about that?
Well, so your case is saw besaw. I lent you tavua. I lent you 100 bushels, and you're paying me back 100 bushels, and the 100 bushels. No, if there's other costs, it's if the inherent value of the 100 bushels is higher than it was in the beginning. So the inherent value is what is the ribis, not extraneous circumstance.
So I want to so in order for me to pay you back in wheat, it's going to cost me more, borrower. It's going to cost me more to pay you back. It's not going to give you more, except that I'm going to give you the same amount of wheat. I have to give you the 100 bushels back. I'm not discounting that to 90 bushels because the price for me to acquire it went up. I'm giving you what I borrowed from you. Is that
Right.
That is not ribis, correct?
So
From the borrower's viewpoint is the question.
Well,
Right, Michael?
but that's not I mean, saw
the
means you're
fact that it
giving back the same thing that you borrowed. So you borrowed 100 bushels, you're giving back 100 bushels. I'm not making any profit for you to give it back. It may cost more now, but that's your problem because you borrowed it from me. Why is that ribis? Why would even we think about that being ribis if the concept is saw besaw, I'm borrowing 100 bushels, I'm paying you back 100 bushels later, 6 months later, and
What's the
regardless of what the
problem?
price is,
What's the
that's what it is, and how you acquired that, that's your problem. But I lent it to you at the time. There's no ribis there.
if the market value of the 100 bushels is the same as before,
No, in
and
my
but you have
example,
to,
it's gone
but
up.
you
Let's say
have
it's
to
gone up
pay,
10% in 6 months.
but you
I
have to
still,
pay, you have to pay more to get it.
that's your problem.
That's your problem. That's not ribis.
So that's not ribis. So when the borrower pays back, and it might cost him the value, let's say, what for 100 bushels was $100, and it cost me 110 to procure it, but I'm giving you back the 100 bushels. That's my problem as the borrower. I needed it at that time. I have to find a way to pay you back exactly. That's not ribis.
Michael, there's a difference between whether the inherent value of the 100 bushels, the price went up. If it cost you more money aside, because you have to, whatever reason it cost you more money, then it's not ribis. But if the value of the tavua of the 100 bushels went up, there's a difference. If the value goes up because you go out into the marketplace, you're now going to pay $110 as opposed to $100. Then that's ribis. You have to give them only a portion of that 100 bushels.
It makes no sense because if the value went down, I still have to give him the 100, and
That's right.
I wouldn't give them the equivalent value. So it's only a one-way street.
Correct.
And the fact is, that's not saw besaw because I borrowed this, I'm giving this back to you. So I thought we said before in commodities, if you exchange a commodity, it's very simple. You borrow commodity, you return the commodity. It's not so simple because if the value in the marketplace, you can't have it. It's so inconsistent in concept that if the lender gets screwed, that's fine. If the borrower gets screwed, it's a problem.
So the question, Michael, is what are the assumptions about the marketplace or about the produce when the contract was signed?
Well, but we just learned that doesn't matter because I just asked if it was a fixed contract.
That's your
Pay
question.
back at that value. Now, if the value has gone up, that is not a valid contract.
That's your question. What are the assumed assumptions when this contract was signed?
You're going to pay it back at the value at the time it's made. It's a loan. You're paying back at the time it's made. Now you're telling me if I borrow 100 bushels a week and I pay you back 100 bushels 6 months later, I have 6 months to pay you back, and it costs me more, even though in the contract it establishes that value, it's ribis. And that doesn't make any sense.
No, that's not ribis. when you pay back the original
No,
product.
because the value of the commodity went up. So I have to pay
Value
more to get
doesn't
it back
matter
to
when
you.
you have a loan. As
Uh-huh.
long as you pay back the same thing, a
Well,
bicycle.
but we
I
just heard
borrowed a
the opposite.
scooter,
We just heard the
Michael.
opposite of
If
that.
I borrow a scooter from you, I have to pay back another scooter.
But if the price, if I understood what I just heard correctly, if the price of the scooter went up between now and then, the borrower doesn't have to pay a full scooter. It can pay 90% of a scooter.
Correct.
And that is inconsistent.
That doesn't make sense, Michael. I agree with
But
you.
that's the halacha.
But that's the principle of saw b'saw. The principle of saw b'saw is that you can't just look at the scooter, the commodity, and say, I gave you a scooter, you got to give me back a scooter. Because if the scooter increased in value, then there is a benefit to the lender because he's now getting back a more valuable scooter than he got.
But he
And
would have had it
therefore,
anyway.
what?
But
The
He would
same
have had the
thing that he
value
borrowed.
increase anyway. If he
because
didn't lend
another
it.
example using that type of thing as opposed to ordinary produce, you have the issue of I borrow a scooter, I total it, so to speak. So now I'm obligated to replace with another scooter. If I replaced with a similar 2-year-old scooter of original same condition as then I'm great. If I just say, you know what, I can't deal with trying to figure this out, I'm just going to buy another scooter, and I now here's a brand new latest model, that's worth more.
But you know, Menashe, in your example, the 2-year-old scooter, because the market because the price has gone up, is now worth more. You know, it was equivalent to 2-year scooter at the time. Now it's gone up because there's a shortage
Well,
of
that
scooters.
kind of thing can happen.
But
We
he
had that with
doesn't he
used
doesn't
cars at the
own
beginning of the pandemic.
Exactly,
he doesn't
So
exactly.
owe a
it's
brand new
So,
scooter. He
so
only
you
owes
so
him a
this is not
2-year-old
saw
scooter.
saw. I mean that the
the point is it can go either way. Yeah.
right. And so sub, as I understood it, and I obviously didn't understand it right, was that you're exchanging an article for the same exact, you're returning the same article, regardless of what's happened in between time for your cost of acquisition as the borrower. You still have to return it. You're borrowing, you're returning the commodity. What I thought I heard when in weeks past is a commodity returning a commodity is the same thing. So you don't have to worry about that being ribis. Now I'm hearing because, and maybe it's my misunderstanding. So I'm not.
Well, I think the problem is if you're exchanging, if you borrow corn and you pay it back in potatoes, then you got a problem because
Well,
what
but
is
let's stick to the fact that we're paying it in corn 6 months later,
that shouldn't
and
matter.
it's out of season, so it's going to cost more because it's not as plentiful. But we've agreed to the price of corn at that time. So, I mean, but what we're saying here, this machlokes in our current Mishnah is that the Gemara goes on is that if the value changes now from what it was then, you pay back, the borrower pays back in the value now, equivalent to the value then, which is not saw besaw. Saw besaw means item for item, exact
We're
for
coming
exact.
back, but we're coming back to what are the assumptions when you have a star back, related to bushels of something or lending money? What are the assumptions of the conditions of the starting point? And how do those assumptions carry through when it comes to the payback point?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I don't understand all the assumptions that are implied in the Gemara. But the Rabbi, you just said that they don't assume inflation. Okay, that's an assumption. You can state any assumption at the time of the sale, but you have to know what the assumptions are about the stuff you're lending as well as the marketplace. Because it's built into the payback mechanism. You don't know what's going to be in 6 months exactly.
And we would say, Rabbi, that if we assume that, to Jay's earlier point, the normal rate of inflation, let's say it was 3% a year. In 6 months, it'd be 1.5%. We can't put that in the contract that you're going to pay me the equivalent of 1.5% higher when you return it, because that, even though the cost is higher, because you said we can't reflect that. So,
maybe assume that in the contract that whenever he has to pay back, either he has the choice of money payback or the actual bushels.
But if it was a sale, then it would be fine. But if it's a loan of those goods with that assumption, the contract would be illegal halachically.
But the contract can't be both a sale and a loan.
So you're hitting on something very interesting.
That's been my problem.
You're hitting something very interesting, because if it starts as a loan and it's a loan all the way through, and at the end you're repaying the loan, and it's the saw principle applies, and therefore you can't do it because of ribis. But what we normally interpret, and this is going to be a little bit of an interesting sort of side step, is that you want to know how to get around it. Then you say, the saw in the beginning, you sold it to me. You didn't lend it to me. You sold it to me. And I'm returning now. What I'm doing now is I'm doing a reverse sale, and I'm giving you back a saw. Then you don't have a problem, because remember, the Gemara makes a chilik between a loan and a sale. So in the case of the sale, in the case of a loan, it's ribis. In the case of a sale, it's not ribis. Rav Oshia's case, even though it looked like a loan, right, because it went from commodity to commodity to commodity, it looked like he kept lending him commodities. But what did we interpret it to be? We said it was a sale, and therefore there's no ribis. So in order for there not to be ribis in the case of a saw b'saw, you have to now translate that it wasn't a loan, it was a sale. So he sold him a saw for $100, and now he's buying back a saw for $110. There's no ribis in that particular
but Rabbi,
case.
that obviates the purpose of the loan. The loan is to
Right,
lend
so
because you don't have money and you need to do that. So the essence is lost of lending to somebody else. So we're losing the what the purpose of is to be proper Yiddishkeit values are to lend to your brother who doesn't have. So you got to go through all these painstaking workarounds to accomplish, because it seems like we're dealing with not the essence, but we're getting caught up in the details, mired in the details of perceiving what the purpose of this is supposed to be, is to lend to help your brother.
Right. No, you're 100% right, which is why you're right. So if a person lends, he shouldn't be disadvantaged because he helped his brother. So that's what so we're reinterpreting and saying that if you make that, now it often doesn't happen when the price increases, so therefore there's no problem. But in that particular situation, maybe then they didn't have as much inflation. But in a particular situation where there is inflation and the price has gone up, then the Chazal, what we have to do is we have to reinterpret the contract. We have to say that contract was a sale and not a loan, therefore it can be, and that's permitted.
How can you do that? How can you do
the
that?
contract and say it was a sale, not a loan.
A sale means you exchange something. You exchange money and you get a product. A loan is you get you don't buy anything. You give something to somebody and you got an obligation to get it back. I mean, are you saying an obligation is a sale?
But we're looking at it through our contemporary eyes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing. I mean, we have a commodity market that we see every day during trading hours, we see the prices change up and down as we go along.
Yeah.
I would assume during the time of the Gemara that it wasn't so stark
Correct.
a
Correct.
change. So I know that one of the things we're doing is putting contemporary eyes on what was happening then. Still, it's hard to fathom.
Right. So someone who's engaged in the commodity, a film person who's engaged in the commodity market today, has to know the rules and has to, again, you have to do it carefully so that there is through a heter iska or whatever it is you're doing, because that's your business. So you have to make sure, again, if you're dealing with other Jews, if it's Islam, then you don't have to worry. But if you're dealing with another Jew in a commodity situation, then exactly right. You have to be very, very careful. And what the Chazal, what we're saying is that where that saw stares you in the face, and now you're going to wind up with less than a saw back, then we have to think about how do we make him whole. So one of the ways to make him whole is to recast the whole deal as a sale and not as a loan. And therefore, in a sale, I can sell you one thing for $100, and you can send me the same thing back a week later for 110, and there's no ribis because it's a sale, not a loan. That's the workaround.
This is form over substance, because in essence, you can
gouge. It is form over substance, correct. But the form matters.
Gouge what formerly was the borrower. You could gouge the buyer now, and it doesn't matter.
You're not gouging him because
I think we need a chart here that somebody makes up, and we send it to everybody, and then we can discuss the assumptions as well as the examples, and that might clear it up, because I'm having a little bit of trouble memorizing.
Right.
You
aren't the only one.
Visual version of what we're talking about.
Right. Well, no, it is a little bit complicated.
Why can't we just, if looking at it, if somebody asks you for a loan, if you have the money, you give the person a loan. You don't have to ask for anything back. Just expect the money back. My father once told me something. He said, if you ever lend somebody $25 and he never gives it back to you, consider that your best investment you've ever made, because it could be $25,000. So with that saying, if you're going to give the person money, he's your brother, he needs the money, you give it to him. If you don't have it, you say no. If you go in to buy something and you don't like the price for any reason what it is, go to someone else. Don't go to the person. The cheapest person is not going to be the best quality, and it's not going to be the most honest person. So look for somebody that's in between. Look who you're dealing with. Know the person you're dealing with. And look, we can avoid all this discussion.
Yeah.
Well, if you say if
excuse me, gentlemen, I have to leave.
Yeah. Okay. So this very spirited discussion. We'll try to pick it up, but the points are all well made. And that's why you see the complication of ribis. That's why you have to be super careful. You're right. You have to balance it against. You have to help your brother by lending him. But there are repercussions to that in the time of the Gemara. And now we've established new rules, right? That we've established which help bridge the gap between saw b'saw of then and saw b'saw now, because we have heter iska and we have different ways of dealing with it. But the time of the Gemara, which is the only way you could look at this right now, is what happened in real time. In real time, there wasn't inflation. Okay, they didn't have inflation, but let's say the commodity price went up. Then you're not allowed to give him back the same commodity because it's a greater value. All right, let's hold that thought. We'll pick up. We'll try to sort of go through a little bit more, and the Gemara has a lot more to talk about. But at this point in time, the Gemara has sort of made peace with the fact that there's a chilik between a halva, which is not permissible, and a sale, which is permissible, and therefore says, and the Gemara sort of said, by purchasing, there are there are offsets, like the broker situation. So that even by a sale where you would worry about ribis d'Rabbanan, there's no ribis because you're paying a broker, and therefore the price differential is not material. All right, let's stop there. It's wonderful.
Yashiko,